Yeah, so I'm going to talk about catastrophism and about what I think its trend, or which I don't feel it's really needed, or we don't really need to pay too much attention to it as regards the discourse on regarding catastrophes. I have to say this is very much work in progress. So some of the things that I will be talking about here are might sound very obvious to most of you or to all of you, and some of them might sound very loose, or both obvious and loose. So I hope I can have some feedback that will help me, making my my paper a bit sharper in the future. So the object of the talk is, as I said, to argue against catastrophism, the talk about catastrophes in climate change, at least when it comes at least as seen as a strategy to get individual agents, individual people, to get involved in the fight for climate change. Very roughly, the outline of the argument will take it that catastrophes, so I will try to defend that catastrophes are possible worlds, which are too remote possible worlds, and because of that, individuals don't feel don't have the perception that they need to. It's urgent to take action to avoid it. This doesn't mean that individuals do not care about catastrophes. So it's not an argument. It's not, my argument is not trying to claim, or I won't be trying to claim that we shouldn't care about catastrophes, but just that the catastrophes talk is not effective in involving individuals into the fight, into fighting for against climate change. Yeah. So the talk comes in 3 parts, and then the conclusions. I will show how we can find catastrophes talk in climate change. I will give a couple of examples of that in order to frame the discussion. Then I will go on and explain what I take catastrophes to be and what's the notion of catastrophism that I will be arguing against in the talk, and then I will argue that it is not needed for this kind of talk in either or neither in the scientific literature or in the media. Okay, so here's my first example of what I mean by catastrophist talk. This is an excerpt from the IPCC 4th assessment report, and well, it says very clearly the possibility of abrupt climate change and or abrupt changes in the Earth system triggered by climate change with potentially catastrophic consequences cannot be ruled out. Disintegration of the West Antarctic ice sheet, if it occurred, could raise the sea level around by 4-6 meters, and well, in some this could have far-reaching adverse ecological and agricultural consequences. So yeah, things to note in this quote for the purposes of the talk is that this, I would like to make the emphasis on the potentially, so it's catastrophic, is potential, is not, is very uncertain, and the idea that we are not referring to only to specific events, but to an idea of catastrophe that is related to somehow existential risk. Yeah. Another example that was from the, so to speak, scientific literature. This is coming from the media. This is taken from the New Yorker. This is just the front page. It's an article by Elizabeth Colbert in 2016, and I just I just got two excerpts from it. And again, researchers conclude that just a few more decades of unabated carbon emissions could result in more than 3 feet of sea level rise from the western Antarctic ice sheet melting by the end of this century. Over the longer term, melt from the Antarctica could rise sea levels by 50 feet. This is the idea of catastrophe here, and this is of course alarming news. So this is again one of the words I would like to stress here: the alarm that is supposed to raise. This is what I take to be one of the aims of such catastrophe talk, and I will talk about this later, but I will make a little bit of an emphasis in this last bit of this quotation, in spite of the flood of disturbing reports coming from both the Antarctic and the Arctic. The issue of climate change has rarely come up during the presidential primary campaign. I take this to be very symptomatic of what I'm trying to argue, namely that individuals are not really, I wouldn't say worried, but they are not, they don't feel the urgency of dealing with such idea of catastrophe right now. As I said, I will go back to that issue later in the talk. So we may ask, why is catastrophism or reference to catastrophe so commonplace, even in the scientific literature? And again, this is an idea of catastrophe. It's not just about specific events, but it's a more general and deep idea of catastrophe. And a very preliminary tentative answer might be that since catastrophes are high impact events, both for agents and environment, well, they should urge to take action to avoid them, to avoid such scenarios. The bottom line is, well, even if catastrophes are low probability events, then we must worry about the possibility of them happening and act accordingly. So this talk of catastrophe somehow is endorsing some sort of precautionary principle. So what is catastrophe? Taken or looking at the quotations or the quotations I gave you, it can be, in order to argue against the catastrophist talk, it might be useful to pinpoint a little bit more precisely what we are dealing with. I mean, what is the notion of catastrophe? I don't mean to give you a very exhaustive notion of catastrophe here, but just a very rough, general, perhaps definition of it. So, in the first place, catastrophes are, I take it, are agent-based, is an agent-based notion, which involves radical change in the environment, which affects agents.
Can you say a bit more about what you mean by it's an agent-based notion?
Yeah, I'll go back to it and say a little bit more about it. And it's also something that so catastrophes are usually seen as low probability events, so they are not very likely to happen. And I will expand a little bit more on the three general features of the notion of my notion of catastrophe. And this last one I will talk about possible worlds. So a very rough definition along these three, or taking into account these three features of catastrophe, could be this. And again, this is not to serve as a precise a very precise definition, but just as a working definition for the purpose of the talk. Nevertheless, I think that this is a sensible definition for the notion of catastrophe, and we can say that an event or a situation is catastrophic for an agent, and here's where the agent-based dimension of the notion comes in, who lives or inhabits in an environment. If there is a radical change in the present state of affairs, such as the environment is no longer in equilibrium, and readaptation on the part of the agent is almost impossible, if not impossible, in the short term. This impossibility is tied to the notion of existential risk that we can attach to the notion of catastrophe. So, what do I mean about catastrophe being as an agent-based term? Mainly that it's a term that it applies to, at least as I see it applies to agents, in the sense that catastrophic events are catastrophes only for some agents, and something can be a catastrophe for some agents and cannot be a catastrophe for some other agents. Okay, so this introduces some, I would say, agent relativity or relativity when it comes to how catastrophe are related to agents. Catastrophes also mean that there is a radical change. Usually it's an environmental radical change. The environment moves too far from equilibrium in a very short time. This going away from equilibrium is abrupt. The change in the state of affairs is too abrupt and unpredictable. And as a consequence of that, agents are not able or find it difficult to readapt to the new state of affairs. this is the catastrophic, or what I take it to, I mean, what I take catastrophe to mean, that agents are not able to somehow live in the new environment or in the radically changed environment anymore. Okay. So, finally, I went through the idea that catastrophes are agent-based, or catastrophe is an agent-based notion, that it involves radical change. Now, I would like to motivate the notion of catastrophe as a notion of possible world. This was somehow done already yesterday in a talk, but I think it's, and this might sound very obvious, climate change models and predictions yield scenarios which may result in catastrophic events as possibilities, even if it's only a very low probability possibility, and this means to me that they can be seen, or they are seen as possible worlds. One of the features of such models is they involve huge uncertainties, and these uncertainties make these possibilities or these new scenarios very unpredictable, and as a result, the catastrophic scenarios are highly unknown, unpredictable possible worlds, which again they are characterized by a rapid or quick radical change in the present state of affairs. And this takes us to the notion of distant, remote, possible world. So what I'm trying to argue here is that because of these uncertainties, and because this highly unknown character of the possible worlds that are catastrophic scenarios, these are very distant, epistemically even, very distant or remote possible worlds. Yeah, so we can say that catastrophe scenarios are remote, low probability, and possible worlds. Okay, so I somehow set the stage here for what we are dealing with, is what I'm understanding by catastrophe scenarios, and now I'd like to go back to why is so common the talk about catastrophism in the literature, and argue, as I said, that this talk is really not needed. So, going back to that, again, what I take it to be the intended aim of the catastrophic discourse is this. So, because of the potentially strong impact of catastrophes, both on the environment and on the agents that live in it, catastrophism, talk about catastrophes, seem to be aimed at urging agents to take action in order that helps avoiding such scenarios. So this I take is what the catastrophism talk is trying to motivate in us as individuals, with capacity to act, to take some decisions and act to fight climate change. So the question, again, this is the main question of the talk: is this an effective strategy? So does catastrophism help individuals to actually take action to fight for climate change? So does catastrophism fulfill its aim? That's what I'm trying to ask, or to look at here. And going back to the quotation from the New Yorker, so my answer to that question is no, and I would like to motivate it by looking again to what I take it to be a symptom of this ineffectiveness of catastrophic talk to get agents involved in the individual, so to speak, action, in individual action for climate change, to fight climate change. And the symptom is, well, maybe I'm twisting the words too much here, but in this quotation we are told that climate change issues were not present, mainly, or were not very important in the presidential primary campaign, meaning that politicians didn't really feel the need to tackle such issues, to explain what it's needed to be done in order to fight climate change. And this not feeling the need to do so by politicians, I take it, is a reflection of the I wouldn't say an interest from the individuals, from the layman, but a reflection of the low impact of the climate change action proposals on the individuals, on society, individual agents. So my answer to the former questions, whether catastrophism fulfills its aim, is that, well, maybe catastrophism, and I'm not too sure about this, but maybe it can work if we have some adaptation strategies in mind, and I feel that this can be so if we take it that, well, thinking about catastrophes might help us foreseeing, advancing, or building new, or thinking about solutions for the moments when catastrophes happen. So maybe from the point of view of adaptation, it might be useful to think about catastrophes, but I don't feel it's effective if we are again trying to get people, individual agents involved in mitigating or in trying to take action to fight climate change today. Yeah. And why is this? Well, my answer to that is that I already said part of it. Catastrophe being defined along the lines that I did before, since it is a low probability or is associated to low probabilities, that makes it a very distant scenario, very distant from the present states of affairs. So and this is also associated to it being very unlikely, or at least the perception is that it's an unlikely event to happen. It's also unpredictable and highly unknown remote world, and this, well, I don't want to get into that right now, but for instance can be also supported by the fact that it involves difficult to evaluate counterfactual. So if we are thinking about possible worlds in terms of counterfactual conditions, then these seem to be very difficult to evaluate, precisely because they are the possible worlds are very unknown and unpredictable. So the individual perception I claim is that there is catastrophes or is of a low impact on the present quotes or brackets safe state of affairs. So we don't feel threatened by catastrophes or immediate catastrophes coming onto us. And as a consequence, I argue that the need for action does not seem to be too pressing. So the catastrophic scenarios are perceived as too remote and unlikely. So urgent need for action doesn't seem to be very pressing. So bottom line, this kind of catastrophism talk doesn't seem to me to be a very effective strategy. And I shall conclude here. So reference to catastrophe, I tried to suggest or show that it's very it's commonplace in the literature, both in the scientific literature and the media aimed at social readers, individual society, or individuals and society in general. And it has the aim to promote or to urge for individual action or for action against climate change. I argue that catastrophe is an agent-based notion, and that it involves radical change. Catastrophic scenarios are very remote, or are perceived as remote and unlikely possible worlds, and because of that, I argue that catastrophism is not really an effective strategy if we want to get individual agents involved in taking decisions, immediate action to fight climate change. Mainly because these possible worlds are too distant. And here I end. Thank you.